I found him on a cold October night in 1972, lying in a dried-up arroyo near my property. At first, I thought it was a child who'd gotten lost in the desert, maybe hurt in a fall. But when my flashlight beam found those eyes, dark, endless, looking up at me with an intelligence that seemed older than time itself, I knew I was staring at something that would change my understanding of everything. He was injured, barely moving, and in that moment, I had to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. My name is Robert Crawford. I'm 43 years old, and I live on a small ranch about 15 miles outside of Roswell, New Mexico. I know what you're thinking, Roswell, of course, but despite what the tourists and UFO enthusiasts believe, this town had moved on from the 1947 incident. By 1972, most locals just rolled their eyes at the flying saucer stories. I ran a modest cattle operation, nothing fancy, just enough to get by. My wife Sarah had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, and it was just me, my German Shepherd Duke, and about 40 head of cattle on 160 acres of high desert scrubland. That October evening started like any other. I'd spent the day fixing fence line on the eastern boundary of my property, hard work that left my back aching and my hands raw. I was 43 but felt older, the kind of tired that settles into your bones when you've been working the land your whole life. I'd driven back to the house in my '68 Chevy pickup around sunset, fed Duke, heated up some leftover stew, and settled into my recliner to watch the evening news on my black and white Zenith. Walter Cronkite was talking about the presidential election, Nixon versus McGovern. I remember thinking how nothing much seemed to change in politics, just different names saying the same things. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Duke was barking frantically at the back door, the kind of urgent bark that meant something was wrong. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 10:47 p.m. "What is it, boy?" I asked, pushing myself out of the chair. Duke never barked like that unless there was a coyote near the cattle or something equally serious. I grabbed my denim jacket off the hook and my heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that took 4 D batteries and could light up half an acre. Duke was already scratching at the door, whining. When I opened it, he bolted out into the darkness, heading east toward the arroyo that cut through the back section of the property. "Duke, get back here," I called, but he was gone. I could hear him barking in the distance. Cursing under my breath, I followed. The night was cold, probably in the low 40s, and crystal clear. The stars were incredible. You could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. I'd always loved the night sky out here. No city lights, no pollution, just the universe laid bare above you. The arroyo was about a quarter-mile from the house, a dry creek bed that only ran with water during the heavy monsoon rains. Duke's barking was coming from down in the wash. As I got closer, I could see his silhouette against the starlight, standing rigid, focused on something I couldn't yet see. "Duke, what have you got?" I called out, climbing down into the arroyo. The flashlight beam swept across rocks and scraggly brush until it found what had Duke so agitated. My breath caught in my throat. There was a figure lying among the rocks, small, maybe 4 feet tall, curled on its side. My first thought was a child, and panic surged through me. But as I moved closer, the flashlight revealed details that made no sense. The skin was gray, smooth, almost metallic in the light. The head was too large, oval-shaped, and the arms thin, with long, delicate fingers that had one too many joints. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. The figure stirred slightly, and that's when I saw the eyes. They opened, large, black, almond-shaped eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like dark pools. The being was looking at me, and I felt a sensation I'd never experienced before, like someone was gently touching the surface of my thoughts. "Please, help." The voice wasn't audible. It appeared directly in my mind, weak, barely a whisper of thought. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Duke, quiet!" I commanded. The dog stopped barking but remained alert, his ears pinned back. I knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. Now that I was closer, I could see that the being was injured. There was a dark substance, not quite blood, more like a thick, clear fluid, seeping from a wound on its left side, just below where the ribs would be on a human. Its breathing was shallow, labored. What happened to you? I asked aloud, feeling foolish, talking to something that clearly wasn't human. Accident. My vessel. Damaged. I crashed. Crashed? Like an airplane? Not airplane. I need help, please. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to run, to get back to the house and call someone. But who would I call? The sheriff? And tell him what? That I found an alien in my arroyo? They'd think I'd been hitting the bourbon too hard. And there was something else, something in the way those eyes looked at me. A desperation, a trust that I couldn't explain. This being, whatever it was hurt and afraid. Okay, I said, making a decision. Okay, I'll help you. But I need to get you back to my house. Can you walk? Too weak? Cannot. I looked at the being, assessing. It couldn't have weighed more than 40 or 50 pounds. I was a rancher used to hauling feed sacks and wrestling calves. I could manage. I'm going to pick you up, I said slowly. I won't hurt you. I trust you, Robert Crawford. The fact that it knew my name should have terrified me more than it did. Instead, I carefully slid my arms under the being, one under the legs, one supporting the back and that oversized head. The skin felt cool, smooth, almost like touching silk. I lifted gently, and the being let out a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a groan, as I straightened up. It was lighter than I'd expected, and its head rested against my chest. Duke sniffed cautiously, then seemed to accept this strange situation, and trotted alongside us as I carried my unexpected visitor back to the house. The walk back felt surreal. Here I was, a 43-year-old cattle rancher, carrying an extraterrestrial being across my property under a canopy of stars. If Sarah were alive, she'd have thought I'd lost my mind. But Sarah had always been the practical one. Me? I'd always wondered about what else might be out there. I pushed through the back door with my shoulder and carried the being into the spare bedroom, Sarah's old sewing room, that I'd barely touched since she died. I laid him gently on the single bed, grabbing a pillow to support his head. Up close, in the light of the bedroom lamp, I could see more details. The suit he wore was a single piece, gray like his skin, with no visible seams or fasteners. The wound on his side was still leaking that clear fluid, and I could see the shallow, rapid movement of his chest. I need to stop that bleeding, I said. Do your people have medicine? Something that can help? In my vessel. But vessel is destroyed. Too far. Cannot reach. Then I'll use what I have. Hold on. I ran to the bathroom and grabbed my first aid kit. Gauze, bandages, antiseptic. I had no idea if any of it would work on alien physiology, but I had to try something. When I returned, the being's eyes were closed, his breathing even more shallow. Stay with me, I said, kneeling beside the bed. Don't you dare die in my spare bedroom. Those enormous eyes opened again, and I felt something that might have been gratitude or perhaps amusement brush against my thoughts. I will try not to die in your spare bedroom. Over the next hour, I did my best to clean and dress the wound. The being, I couldn't keep thinking of him as it, endured my ministrations with patience, occasionally sending waves of reassurance through that strange mental connection. The antiseptic didn't seem to hurt him, which was a relief. I wrapped gauze around his torso, careful of those thin limbs. When I finished, I pulled up my old wooden chair and sat beside the bed. Duke had settled on the floor, keeping watch. So, I said, I'm Robert, but you seem to know that already. What do I call you? My name in your language cannot be pronounced, but you may call me Kellen. It is close enough. Kellen, I repeated. All right. And where are you from, Kellen? Very far. Too far to explain tonight. I am tired. You rest, I said. We'll talk more tomorrow. If you need anything, just I don't know. Think at me, I guess. Thank you, Robert. Your kindness is noted. I watched as Kellen's eyes slowly closed, his breathing settling into something that looked more like sleep than unconsciousness. I should have been terrified, should have been questioning my sanity. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm, of purpose. I spent that night in the chair, dozing fitfully, keeping watch over my impossible patient. Duke never left his post either, and somewhere in those quiet hours before dawn, I realized that my life had just taken a turn into territory I could never have imagined. By the time the sun rose on October 23, 1972, I knew one thing for certain. Everything I thought I understood about the universe had been wrong, and somehow I was okay with that. Kellen stayed with me for 3 weeks. Those first few days were touch and go. I wasn't sure he'd make it. His wound was slow to heal, and there were moments when his breathing became so shallow I thought I'd lost him. But gradually, day by day, he grew stronger. And as he recovered, we began to talk, really talk. Those conversations in that small spare bedroom would become the foundation of a friendship that would span decades. The morning after I found him, I called my foreman, Pete Martinez, and told him I was sick with the flu and needed a few days off. Pete had been running the day-to-day operations anyway. He was more than capable of handling things without me. The fewer people who came around the house, the better. I spent that first week barely leaving Kellen's side. I'd bring him water, which he could drink in small amounts, though he explained it wasn't what his body truly needed. His species processed nutrients differently, he said, but water helped. I'd sit in that wooden chair and we'd communicate in that strange, silent way, his thoughts appearing in my mind as clearly as if he'd spoken them aloud. "How old are you?" I asked him one afternoon, maybe 4 days after I'd found him. Sunlight was streaming through the window, and Duke was sprawled on the floor, having fully accepted our unusual house guest. "In your years?" "Approximately 73. 73? I leaned back in surprise. "You don't look it. My species ages differently than yours. We live longer, change more slowly. 73 is still young for us." "How much longer?" "I have known some who lived nearly 200 of your years, but that is rare." I tried to wrap my mind around that. "And you've been coming to Earth? Watching us?" "Yes, I have been observing your species for 31 years. Since 1941. I did the math in my head. The war was still going on. Yes, a terrible time. Your species has a great capacity for both creation and destruction. It is fascinating and troubling." Over those weeks, Kellen told me things that changed how I saw humanity. He spoke about other worlds his people had observed, civilizations that had risen and fallen. He explained that Earth was unique, not because we were special, but because we were at a critical juncture in our development. We had reached the atomic age, had begun venturing into space, but we were still tribal, still fighting among ourselves. "Why do you care what happens to us?" I asked one evening. It was late October, and I'd built a fire in the fireplace. I'd carried Kellen out to the living room for the first time, settling him on the couch with blankets. "Because every species matters. Every consciousness in the universe adds to the whole. When a species destroys itself, something irreplaceable is lost." "You think we're going to destroy ourselves?" "I think you have the capacity to. But you also have the capacity for extraordinary things. Your species is young, impulsive, emotional, but you have creativity, resilience, hope. These are powerful forces." I stared into the fire, thinking about Vietnam, about the Cold War, about all the ways we seem determined to tear ourselves apart. Sometimes it's hard to see the hope. That is why I am telling you this, Robert, because individuals like you need to understand. Your species judges itself too harshly and too lightly at the same time. You focus on your failures, but do not see your potential. "What potential?" Kellen turned those dark eyes toward me, and I felt a wave of something, not quite emotion, but close, wash over me through our connection. The potential to become something remarkable. To join the greater community of conscious beings in this universe. But only if you survive your adolescence as a species. By the end of the second week, Kellen was moving around on his own, though slowly. His wound had closed, leaving only a faint mark on his gray skin. He was fascinated by everything in my house. The television, the radio, my collection of books. He'd pick things up with those long, delicate fingers, examining them with an almost childlike curiosity. One afternoon, I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard music coming from the living room. I walked in to find Kellen standing in front of my record player. I'd left Creedence Clearwater Revival's Cosmos Factory on the turntable from a few nights earlier. Looking Out My Back Door was playing, and Kellen was tilting his head, listening with complete focus. This is remarkable, he communicated. The complexity of the sound, the emotional resonance. Your species creates such beauty. You've never heard music before? Not like this. We have patterns, vibrations that serve a similar purpose, but this is different, more alive. I smiled, pouring my coffee. Want me to play something else? Over the next few days, I introduced Kellen to everything from Johnny Cash to the Beatles. He seemed to appreciate it all, though he was particularly drawn to classical music. I'd pull out Sarah's old collection, Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, and we'd sit in the living room, not speaking, just listening. It was during one of these quiet moments that Kellen first mentioned others of his kind. Robert, I should tell you something. I am not the only one of my people who has visited your world. I set down my coffee cup. There are others, yes, many others over many years. We have been observing Earth for a very long time, centuries by your reckoning. The Roswell incident in '47, was that real? Yes and no. There was a craft. There was a crash. But much of what your government claimed and much of what conspiracy theorists believe is incorrect. The truth, as often happens, lies somewhere in between. Were you involved in that? No, I was not yet assigned to Earth observation then. But I knew those who were lost in that incident. Lost? You mean they died? Yes, it was a tragedy, a malfunction, a miscalculation. Death is not common among my people, but it happens. Those deaths were deeply felt. I sat with that for a moment, realizing that Kellen's people weren't that different from us in some ways. They could be hurt, could die, could grieve. I'm sorry, I said, thank you. It was long ago, but we do not forget. As the third week arrived, I knew Kellen was getting ready to leave. He was moving normally now, his strength fully returned. One morning, I found him standing on my back porch, looking up at the sky. It was early November, and the air had that crisp quality that comes with approaching winter. You're leaving soon, aren't you? I asked, joining him. Yes. My people will come for me. They have been searching, but this is a large world, and I crashed far from where I was supposed to be, but they will find me soon. Will I ever see you again? Kellen turned to look at me, and I felt something warm in my mind. Affection, maybe, or the closest thing his species had to it. Yes, Robert Crawford, you will see me again. What you have done for me, the kindness you have shown, it means more than you know. I would like to continue our conversations if you are willing. I'd like that too. Then I will return. Not immediately. There are protocols, considerations. But I will come back to you. There is much more I want to share with you, much more you need to understand about your species. 3 nights later, I woke to Duke whining softly. I got up and looked out my bedroom window to see a faint light in the sky, moving in ways no airplane or helicopter could move. It hovered over my property for a moment, then descended beyond the ridge to the east, out of sight. I pulled on my boots and jacket and walked out into the cold November night. Kellen was standing in the yard, looking toward the ridge. He turned when he heard me approach. They are here, he communicated simply. Will you be all right? Yes. I will tell them about you, about what you did. They will understand." I extended my hand, a very human gesture. Kellen looked at it for a moment, then reached out with those long fingers and grasped my hand gently. His skin was cool, smooth. "Come back when you can," I said. "I'll leave the light on. I will return, my friend. This is not goodbye. It is merely until next time." And then he was walking toward the ridge, that strange gliding walk of his, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, watching, until I saw a brief flash of light beyond the ridge, and then nothing but stars. I went back inside, made coffee even though it was 3 in the morning, and sat at my kitchen table. Duke rested his head on my knee. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't since Sarah died, and I realized that for 3 weeks, I hadn't been alone. For 3 weeks, I'd had a friend, someone to talk to, someone who made me think about things bigger than fence lines and cattle prices. I didn't know when Kellen would return or if he really would, but somehow I knew he'd keep his promise, and I was right. 6 months later, on a warm May evening in 1973, I'd be standing in that same spot when a familiar figure would emerge from the darkness and our real education would begin. Kellen kept his promise. He returned on May 14th, 1973, exactly 6 months and 11 days after he'd left. I was sitting on my porch that evening, listening to the radio. Nixon was denying involvement in some burglary at the Watergate complex when Duke's ears perked up. A moment later, I saw a figure walking across my property from the eastern ridge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. I stood up, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and relief. Part of me had worried those 3 weeks had been some kind of breakdown, that grief and isolation had finally caught up with me. But there he was, real as the day I'd found him, walking toward my house with that distinctive gliding gait. "Hello, Robert," Kellen's voice appeared in my mind, warm and familiar. "I hope I am not intruding." "Intruding? Kellen, you're always welcome here." I walked down the porch steps to meet him. "How have you been?" "Well, recovered and grateful. My people wanted me to convey their thanks for what you did." "You told them about me?" "Of course, they were intrigued." It is not often that a human responds with such immediate compassion. Usually there is fear first, sometimes only fear. We went inside and I made coffee. I'd learned Kellen enjoyed the smell even if he couldn't drink it. We settled into what would become our routine over the coming years. Me in my recliner, Kellen on the couch, Duke between us, and hours of conversation stretching into the night. That visit, Kellen stayed for 5 days. He told me he could only come periodically. There were protocols, rules about contact with humans, but he'd been granted permission to continue our discussions, provided I told no one about him. I agreed readily. Who would I tell anyway? Pete would think I'd lost my mind, and I had no family left to speak of. During that week in May 1973, Kellen began to really open up about what his people had observed about humanity. We were sitting outside one night, watching the stars, when he said something that stuck with me. "Your species is paradoxical, Robert. You are capable of extraordinary cruelty, yet also profound kindness. You destroy your environment while simultaneously creating art that captures its beauty. You wage wars over resources you could share, yet individuals will sacrifice everything for strangers." "You make us sound schizophrenic," I said with a slight smile. "Not schizophrenic. Young, conflicted, still learning who you are as a species. Most intelligent species go through this phase, the struggle between individual survival and collective good, between tribal identity and global consciousness. Do most species make it through?" Kellen was quiet for a long moment. "No, many destroy themselves. The transition from planetary to spacefaring civilization is the most dangerous time. You have the power to end your world now, but not yet the wisdom to consistently choose not to." "That's cheerful," I muttered. "But some do make it through, and those who do often become remarkable. Your species has something special, Robert, an intensity, a passion. If you survive, you could contribute something unique to the universe. Over the next several years, Kellen visited me regularly, sometimes every few months, sometimes with longer gaps. Each visit brought new insights, new perspectives on humanity that I'd never considered. He watched our television with fascination, read my newspapers and magazines, asked endless questions about our culture, our beliefs, our conflicts. In August 1974, as Nixon resigned and Gerald Ford took office, Kellen sat in my living room watching the coverage with intense focus. "This is good," he communicated. "Your system is working as designed. A leader who betrayed trust is removed peacefully through your institutions. Many species never develop this capability." "It doesn't feel very peaceful," I said, watching the chaos on the screen. But no blood was shed, no coup occurred. "The transition of power will happen according to your laws." "This is remarkable, Robert. Do not underestimate it." In 1976, Kellen was with me on July 4th when the nation celebrated its bicentennial. We watched the tall ship sailing into New York Harbor on my color television. I'd finally upgraded from the old black and white. 200 years, Kellen mused. Such a short time, yet you have accomplished so much, and still so much conflict, so much to learn. "What's the biggest thing we need to learn?" I asked. "If you could tell humanity one thing, what would it be?" Kellen turned those dark eyes toward me. "That you are one species, not many. That the divisions you create, by nation, by race, by religion, are illusions. Useful illusions, perhaps, for organizing societies, but illusions nonetheless. Until you understand you are one family sharing one world, you will always be at war with yourselves." "That's a hard sell," I said. "People have been fighting over differences since the beginning, yes. And if you continue, it may be your end as well." The visits continued through the late 70s and into the 80s. I was in my 50s now, feeling my age more with each passing year. My hair had gone completely gray and arthritis was setting into my hands. But those visits with Kellen kept me sharp, kept me thinking about things beyond fence posts and cattle markets. In March 1981, after Reagan had been shot and survived, Kellen and I had a long conversation about violence in human society. "Why do you accept it?" he asked. "The violence, the weapons everywhere, the assumption that killing is sometimes necessary?" "I don't know that we accept it so much as we don't know how to stop it. It's always been part of human nature. Has it? Or is it part of human history, which you confuse with nature? Your ancient ancestors needed aggression to survive, but you no longer live in that world. Yet you carry those instincts forward. Can we change? I mean, really change?" Every species that survives must change. Evolution is not only biological, Robert, it is also social, cultural, ethical. Your species is capable of this evolution. I have seen glimpses of it in individuals and communities in moments of crisis when you come together. But it must become consistent, not occasional. By 1985, I was 56 years old, and our conversations had begun to shift. Kellen spoke more urgently now about the future, about challenges facing humanity that we couldn't yet see. "Your technology is advancing faster than your wisdom," he told me one cool September evening. We were on the porch, as we often were. "In the next decades, you will develop capabilities that will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Computers that think, genetic manipulation, weapons that make nuclear bombs look primitive. Every new capability is a test. Will we pass? I do not know. That is why I tell you these things, Robert, because someone needs to understand. Someone needs to remember that with great power comes the necessity of great wisdom." But I'm just one person, one old rancher in New Mexico. What can I do with this knowledge? You can remember it, you can share it when the time is right. And you can be an example, proof that humans and my kind can coexist, can communicate, can be friends. That alone is significant. In the spring of 1987, Kellen told me something that changed the nature of our relationship. "Robert, I want to teach you something. Our communication has been one way. I project thoughts to you, and you speak aloud. But humans have latent abilities you do not use. I believe I can help you develop them." "You mean telepathy?" "Actually, telepathy. Not as strong as mine, but enough to project simple thoughts, feelings. It would make our communication more equal." Over the next several visits, Kellen worked with me, teaching me to quiet my mind, to focus my thoughts, to project them outward. It was frustrating work, like trying to use a muscle I'd never known I had. But gradually, slowly, I began to succeed. Simple things at first, feelings, yes or no responses. By 1989, I could send basic thoughts to Kellen, crude and rough compared to his refined communication, but real. "This is good, my friend," he encouraged. "You are learning. Not many humans can do this." "Why me? Why am I able to?" "I do not fully know. Perhaps because you were open to it. Perhaps because we have built such strong trust. Or perhaps you simply have a natural aptitude. But it is a gift, Robert. Use it wisely." As the 80s gave way to the 90s, I felt time weighing on me more heavily. I was approaching my 60s, and my body reminded me of that fact daily. Pete had essentially taken over running the ranch. I was more of an advisor now than an active operator. But my mind was still sharp, sharpened perhaps by years of conversations with Kellen. During a visit in early 1990, Kellen brought up something he'd been avoiding for years. "Robert, we must discuss something difficult. Your lifespan. I have been observing you aging, and I calculate you have perhaps 25 to 30 years remaining, if you are fortunate." "I know," I said quietly. "I'm not young anymore." "This troubles me. We have been friends for 18 years. The thought of continuing without you is unpleasant." I was surprised by the emotion in his communication. "I didn't know you could feel that way." "We are not emotionless, Robert. We simply express differently. You have been important to me. Losing you will be a loss I will carry for the rest of my existence." "Then we'd better make the most of the time we have left," I said. "There's still a lot I want to understand, a lot you haven't told me yet." "Yes, there is much more, and I promise you, my friend, I will share it all." By 1992, I had turned 63, and the ranch was essentially Pete's operation now. I'd officially made him a partner, signing over half the business to him. He'd earned it after 20 years of loyal work, and truthfully, I didn't have the energy anymore to do much more than oversee things from a distance. My knees ached constantly, my back protested every morning, and I'd developed a persistent cough that the doctor said was probably just the dry desert air irritating my lungs after decades of breathing it. But my mind was still sharp, maybe sharper than ever, honed by years of conversations with Kellen. Our telepathic communication had grown stronger too. I could now send him complete thoughts, even simple images sometimes. It was nowhere near as effortless as his abilities, but Kellen seemed genuinely impressed by my progress. "Most humans never develop this at all," he told me, during a visit in April 1992. We were sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "Your species has the potential buried deep in your evolutionary history, but modern life has dulled these senses. You have reawakened something ancient." "Oh, does that mean other humans could do this too?" I projected the thought to him, still proud when I managed clean communication. "Yes, with proper training, guidance, patience. But few would be open to it. Fear closes the mind, Robert. You have never been afraid of me, not really. That openness is rare." That spring and summer, Kellen's visits became more frequent. He came every 3 or 4 weeks, staying for several days each time. I noticed a change in him, an urgency that hadn't been there before. He wanted to tell me more, to share information he'd been holding back for years. One night in late June, we were inside escaping the heat. Even at 9 p.m. it was still over 90 degrees. I had the swamp cooler running, and we were drinking iced tea. Well, I was drinking. Kellen just enjoyed holding the cold glass, fascinated by the condensation forming on the outside. "You've been holding something back," I said, watching him carefully. "I can feel it. There's something you want to tell me, but haven't." Kellen set down the glass and turned those enormous dark eyes toward me. Even after 20 years, those eyes still sometimes caught me off guard. So alien, yet somehow expressive in ways I'd learned to read. You are correct. There is something I have not shared, not because I do not trust you, but because it is difficult. Disturbing, perhaps. We've talked about nuclear weapons, environmental destruction, genocide. What could be more disturbing than that? This is different. This is about what I have observed in individual humans, about the struggle within each of you between what you are and what you could be. I leaned forward in my recliner. I'm listening. Robert, in my 73 years, I am 93 now, by your counting, I have observed thousands of individual humans. I have watched your cities from above, walked among you when necessary, studied your behavior in every context imaginable. And what I have learned is this: your species is at war with itself, but the war is not between nations or religions or races. It is within each individual human. I don't understand. You are animals, Robert, evolved primates with ancient instincts for survival, territory, reproduction, dominance. These instincts served you well for millions of years. But you are also more than animals. You have consciousness, imagination, the ability to consider consequences beyond immediate survival. You can choose to act against your instincts. This creates constant internal conflict. I thought about that, rubbing my arthritic hands together. You're saying we're fighting our own nature? Not fighting, struggling to transcend it. Every human faces this struggle every day, in small ways and large. The instinct to be selfish versus the choice to be generous. The impulse to react with anger versus the decision to respond with patience. The desire to take versus the commitment to share. This is the fundamental human conflict, and it plays out billions of times every day across your world. And we're failing at it, I said quietly. No, not failing, struggling. There is a difference. I have seen humans make the transcendent choice as often as the instinctive one, sometimes more often. A mother who shares her last food with her children even as she starves. A soldier who shields a stranger with his own body. A wealthy person who gives to those in need. These choices, to override survival instinct with conscious compassion, these are acts of true consciousness. These are what make you potentially remarkable. I stood up, too restless to sit. I walked to the window, looking out at the dark desert. But for every person making those choices, there's someone choosing cruelty, violence, greed. Yes. And that is why your species stands at a crossroads. Your technology has advanced to the point where individual choices have global consequences. A person in one country can now affect millions in another. Your actions in one decade will determine the fate of your grandchildren's grandchildren. The struggle between instinct and consciousness is no longer just personal, it is planetary. Kellen stood and moved beside me at the window. He was shorter than me, his head coming up to about my shoulder, but standing there together, I felt we were equals in a way that transcended physical differences. "Let me tell you something I have never told another human," he communicated, and I felt the weight of trust in those words. My people watch many worlds, many species. Some we merely observe, others we try to guide, subtly, carefully. We do not interfere directly. That would violate fundamental principles we hold sacred. But we nudge, we inspire, we hope. You've been doing that with us, with humanity, for centuries. Small things. An idea placed in a receptive mind. A crucial meeting arranged through seemingly coincidental circumstances. We do not control, but we encourage paths toward wisdom rather than destruction. Has it worked? Sometimes. Your species has avoided several extinction events that seemed inevitable. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, for instance. We did not prevent it directly, but we may have helped certain individuals find the wisdom to step back from the brink. There have been others. I turned to look at him. Why are you telling me this now? Because the next test is coming, Robert. Soon. Within the next few years, your species will face challenges that will make the Cold War look simple. The rise of global computer networks, the manipulation of your own genetic code, environmental changes you have set in motion but cannot yet see. These are not distant threats. They are immediate. And you think we'll fail? I think you might. The odds are not favorable, but I also think you might succeed. Your species has surprised us before, and that is why I continue to visit you, why I continue to share these truths. Because someone needs to understand the full scope of what is happening. Someone needs to carry this knowledge forward. We talked until after midnight that night. Kellen described other species his people had observed, some that had achieved remarkable peace and cooperation, others that had destroyed themselves through short-sightedness and greed. He told me about worlds that had been beautiful and were now dead, their atmospheres poisoned, their resources exhausted, their civilizations collapsed. Is that our future? I asked as the night deepened. It could be. Or you could become something else entirely. The next 20 to 30 years will determine which path you take. The choices made now will echo for centuries. In August of 1992, I was watching the news coverage of Hurricane Andrew devastating Florida. 23 people had died, and the images were heartbreaking. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, families who had lost everything. Kellen was with me, and I could feel his sadness through our connection. This will become more common, he communicated. Your climate is changing, Robert. The signs are already visible to those who look. But your species argues about whether it is happening while your world heats and your weather becomes more violent. Can we stop it? Perhaps, if you act now, dramatically, collectively. But that requires setting aside individual and national interests for the global good. That requires the transcendent choice on a massive scale. I do not know if your species is capable of that yet. That fall, as the presidential election between Bush and Clinton played out on television, Kellen and I had numerous conversations about leadership and human governance. Your democratic systems are remarkable, he observed. Imperfect, certainly. Manipulated by wealth and propaganda? Yes. But you have created a mechanism for peaceful transfer of power, for collective decision-making. Many species never achieve this. They remain under authoritarian control until they destroy themselves, or occasionally evolve beyond it. You sound almost hopeful about us. I am. Despite everything, I remain hopeful. Your species has something special, Robert. An intensity of emotion, a creative spark, a stubborn resilience. If you can learn to channel these qualities toward collective good rather than tribal conflict, you could become extraordinary. By early 1993, my health was declining noticeably. The cough had worsened, and I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. The doctor had started talking about tests, about possibilities I didn't want to consider. Kellen noticed immediately during his first visit that spring. You are unwell, he stated plainly. It wasn't a question. Just getting old, Lust, I said, trying to dismiss it. Happens to all of us. This is more than age. Your body is failing in specific ways. I can sense it. Yeah, well, not much to be done about it. We all die, eventually. Kellen was quiet for a long time. When he finally communicated again, I felt genuine distress in his thoughts. I wish I could help you. My people have medical capabilities far beyond yours, but the protocols, bringing human subjects to our vessels, treating them with our technology, it is strictly forbidden. The risk of exposure, of panic, of disrupting your natural development. I understand, I said. and I meant it. I wouldn't want you to break your rules for me. Besides, I've had a good life. A longer one than I expected after Sarah died. You gave me that, purpose. Something to think about bigger than myself. You gave me something as well, Robert. Friendship. Understanding that humans are not just a species to observe, but individuals worthy of connection. I will carry what you taught me for the rest of my existence. Throughout 1993 and into 1994, Kellen's visits continued, though I could tell he was troubled. We spent hours talking about everything: philosophy, science, human nature, the future. He seemed determined to share everything he knew, as if aware that our time together was limited. One evening in March 1994, we were sitting outside. It was one of those perfect New Mexico nights. Cool, but not cold. The stars so bright, they looked like holes punched in the fabric of space. Duke had passed away the previous winter, at the age of 14, and I missed his presence. But Kellen was here, and that was enough. "Tell me, Robert," he communicated. "After all these years, all our conversations, what do you think is the most important thing humans need to understand?" I thought carefully before answering, both aloud and in my mind. That we're not separate, not from each other, not from this planet, not from the universe. Every division we create is artificial. We're all part of the same story, the same cosmic experiment, and we'll either learn to act like it or we'll destroy ourselves pretending we're separate. I felt what might have been approval, or perhaps pride, flow through our connection. You understand, truly understand. This is what I hoped for when I first chose to return to you all those years ago. Kellen, can I ask you something? Why me, really? Out of billions of humans, why did you choose to share all this with one old rancher in New Mexico? Because you found me when I was vulnerable and chose kindness over fear. Because you asked questions rather than making assumptions. Because you have the capacity to hold contradictory ideas without needing to resolve them immediately into certainty. And because, Robert Crawford, you are one of the best examples of what your species could become: thoughtful, compassionate, curious, humble. If more humans were like you, I would have no doubt about your species' survival. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars. Somewhere up there, I thought, were Kellen's people, watching, hoping, waiting to see what we would become. What happens if we do make it? I asked eventually. If we survive, evolve, become what you think we could be? Then your species joins the community of conscious beings in the universe, not as conquerors or colonizers, but as partners, contributors. Your art, your music, your unique perspective, all would enrich the cosmic conversation. You would no longer be alone, and neither would we. And if we don't make it, then we will mourn, we will remember, and we will continue watching other worlds, hoping they succeed where you failed. The universe continues, Robert, but something unique will have been lost. As spring turned to summer in 1994, I could feel my body continuing its slow decline, but my spirit felt stronger than ever, filled with the knowledge Kellen had shared, the perspective he'd given me. I knew now that my individual life was small, but the understanding I carried was not. It was part of something much larger, a conversation between species, between consciousness and the universe itself. And as long as Kellen kept visiting, as long as we kept talking, I would continue learning. There was still so much more to understand, so many more truths about humanity that he had yet to reveal. And I intended to absorb every last bit of wisdom he was willing to share, for however much time I had left. It was August 1994 when Kellen told me the truth that would change everything I thought I understood about humanity. The truth that, looking back now, explained so much about why we are the way we are, and why his people cared so deeply about our survival. I'd been in and out of the hospital that summer. The doctors had finally given me a diagnosis I'd been expecting but dreading: lung cancer, stage 3, likely from decades of desert dust and probably some genetic bad luck. They'd offered treatment options, chemotherapy, radiation, but at 65, with my body already worn down, I declined. I wanted whatever time I had left to be on my own terms, in my own home. Pete had been incredible through it all, essentially running the entire ranch operation while checking on me daily. He knew I was sick, but didn't know how serious it was. I'd told him it was pneumonia, nothing to worry about. The fewer people who knew, the better. Kellen had visited 3 times since my diagnosis in June. Each time, I could sense his distress, his frustration at being unable to help, but he respected my choice, understood that I was making my peace with mortality in my own way. On this particular August evening, it was the 12th, I remember, because it was exactly 22 years since I'd first found him, Kellen arrived just as the sun was setting. I was on the porch in my rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat. I'd been cold a lot lately, my body struggling to maintain its temperature. "Robert," his mental voice was gentle, concerned, "you look worse than last time." "Feel worse too," I admitted. "But I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about something you said during your last visit, about humanity standing at a crossroads." "Yes?" "I want to understand it all, everything you've learned about us. No more holding back, no more protecting me from difficult truths. If I'm going to die, and we both know I am, I want to die understanding what my species really is." Kellen came up onto the porch and sat in the chair beside me, the one that used to be Sarah's. For a long moment he just looked at me with those impossibly deep eyes. "Are you certain? Some truths, once known, cannot be unknown." "I'm certain. Tell me everything." Kellen settled back in the chair, his thin form almost childlike in its proportions, yet containing an intelligence and experience that dwarfed my own. When he finally began, his mental voice carried a weight I'd never felt before. "Very well. I will tell you what my people have learned about humanity in our centuries of observation, the truth that we debate endlessly among ourselves, whether to intervene more directly, whether to help you more, whether you are worth the risk." "The risk?" "Yes, Robert, because here is what you must understand. Humans are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." I felt my breath catch. "Dangerous? More dangerous than species with advanced weapons? With space travel? Far more dangerous, and not for the reasons you think. Let me explain." Kellen stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the darkening desert. When he continued, his thoughts were carefully measured, as if he'd been preparing this explanation for years. "We have observed hundreds of intelligent species across the galaxy. Most follow predictable patterns. They evolve slowly, their technology advancing in tandem with their wisdom. They make mistakes, certainly, but they learn gradually, course-correcting over millennia. Their emotions are balanced, their logic strong, their development steady. And we're different, completely different. Humans are evolutionary anomalies. Your emotional capacity is unprecedented. Your ability to feel joy, love, compassion. It exceeds anything we have encountered. But so does your capacity for hatred, rage, and cruelty. You experience emotions at an intensity that would overwhelm most species. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself. That doesn't sound very complimentary. But here is what makes it remarkable, Robert. That emotional intensity combined with your creative intelligence makes you capable of extraordinary things. Art that moves the soul, music that transcends language, acts of heroism that defy logic. You can love so fiercely that you will die for others. This is rare, Robert, vanishingly rare in the universe. But that same intensity drives you to tribalism, to violence, to actions that threaten your own existence. You can hate as powerfully as you can love. And unlike other species, you do not seem to learn from your mistakes. You repeat the same patterns of conflict across generations, even centuries. Kellen turned back to face me, and I felt the full weight of his concern. What terrifies my people about humanity is this. You are advancing technologically at an unprecedented rate, but your emotional and ethical development has not kept pace. You are like children given weapons of mass destruction. Your nuclear arsenals alone could end your species multiple times over. Your environmental damage accelerates even as you understand the consequences. Your genetic research is on the verge of capabilities you are not wise enough to handle responsibly. So we're dangerous because we're powerful but stupid. No, you are dangerous because you are powerful and conflicted. Every human contains the potential for both profound good and terrible evil, and the balance tips constantly. We never know which version of humanity will make the crucial decisions. Will it be the humans who sent Voyager into space with messages of peace, or the humans who built concentration camps and committed genocide? I sat with that for a moment, feeling the truth of it. Both, I said quietly. It's always both, isn't it? We're capable of both. Exactly. And that makes you unpredictable, dangerous. Other species we can model, forecast, understand. But humans, you surprise us constantly. Sometimes beautifully, sometimes horrifically. Is that why you keep watching us? Because you can't predict what we'll do? Kellen moved back to his chair, his communication taking on a different tone, something almost like affection mixed with exasperation. Partly, but also because of what you could become if you survive your adolescence as a species. Robert, I told you humans have something special. Let me be more specific. Your emotional intensity, if channeled constructively, could make you the most creative, compassionate, dynamic species in the known universe. You could contribute art, philosophy, innovation beyond anything currently existing. You could be teachers to other young species, guides who understand the struggle between instinct and wisdom because you lived it. But only if we don't destroy ourselves first. Yes, and that is the question my people cannot answer. We have watched your species for centuries, and we still cannot predict which path you will take. You teeter on the edge of both transcendence and extinction, and sometimes it seems to shift hour by hour. The sun had fully set now, and the stars were emerging, brilliant against the black sky. I could see Kellen's silhouette beside me, this being who had traveled across unimaginable distances to observe our strange, troubled species. What do most of your people think? I asked. Do they think we'll make it? Opinions are divided. Some believe you are too unstable, too violent, too short-sighted. They advocate for minimal contact, for letting nature take its course. If you destroy yourselves, so be it. Others, including myself, believe you deserve a chance, that your potential outweighs your dangers. Why? Why do you believe in us when we can barely believe in ourselves? Kellen turned to look at me, and I felt something powerful flow through our mental connection, something that might have been hope or faith, or perhaps just stubborn optimism, because of individuals like you, Robert. Because in 22 years of knowing you, I have seen you choose wisdom over instinct, compassion over self-interest, curiosity over certainty. You are not unique. There are millions of humans like you, perhaps billions. The question is whether there are enough of you to tip the balance. That's a lot of pressure to put on regular people, yes. But here is what you must understand, what I have been building toward all these years. The fate of humanity will not be decided by governments or armies or corporations. It will be decided by billions of individual choices made every day by ordinary people. The choice to be kind instead of cruel, to share instead of hoard, to think long-term instead of immediate gratification, to see all humans as one species instead of competing tribes. I felt tears forming in my eyes, though whether from emotion or just the effects of illness, I couldn't say. And you think we can do that? I think you must, because the alternative is extinction. And Robert, that would be a tragedy not just for your species, but for the universe. What you could become, it would be a loss we would mourn for millennia. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of Kellen's words settling over me like a heavy blanket. all these years, all these conversations had been building to this truth. Humanity's greatest danger was ourselves, and our only salvation was the same, ourselves. So what do we do? I finally asked. How do we survive? You make the transcendent choice over and over again, every day, in every interaction, every decision. You teach your children to see the world as one family. You support leaders who think in generations, not election cycles. You demand that your technology serves humanity's long-term good, not short-term profit. You remember that you are one species on one planet, at least for now, and that you share a common destiny. That's a tall order. Yes, but humans have done difficult things before. You ended slavery, though it took centuries. You created international laws to prevent war crimes. You developed vaccines and saved millions. You sent humans to the moon. When you cooperate, when you channel your intensity toward common goals, you are extraordinary. You simply need to do it more consistently, more urgently. I coughed, a deep rattling sound that reminded me of my body's deterioration. Kellen waited patiently until I caught my breath. I wish I could live to see it, I said, to see whether we make it or not. You will not, Kellen said gently, but others will carry forward what you have learned. That is how species evolve, Robert. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next, building slowly toward wisdom. Who will I pass it to? I have no children, no family, just an old rancher who talks to an alien nobody knows exists. You will find a way. When the time is right, when you find someone who will listen and understand, you will share what you know. Or perhaps you will write it down. Or perhaps the simple fact of your existence, that you and I were friends, that humans and my kind can coexist peacefully, perhaps that itself is the message. I looked at Kellen, this being who had been my companion, my teacher, my friend for more than 2 decades. Will you be okay after I'm gone? I will miss you deeply, but I will continue the work, watching, hoping, occasionally nudging when protocols allow, and I will remember you, Robert Crawford. Among all the humans I have observed, you stand out. You are proof that your species can be wise, can be kind, can be worthy of a place among the stars. Thank you, I whispered, for everything, for trusting me, for teaching me, for being my friend when I had no one else. Thank you for saving my life that October night, for choosing compassion when you could have chosen fear. Everything that followed came from that one choice. We talked late into the night about smaller things now, memories of our years together, funny moments, profound conversations. Kellen told me about his homeworld, describing colors and sensations that human language couldn't quite capture. I told him about Sarah, about my childhood, about the dreams I'd had when I was young. As the night deepened toward dawn, I felt exhaustion pulling at me. The cancer had been draining my energy more and more each day. Rest, Kellen communicated gently. I will stay nearby. I will not leave until morning. Will you come back after tonight? Yes. As long as you live, I will visit. And when you pass, I will remember you. Always. I closed my eyes, the blanket wrapped around me, the desert night cool and peaceful. In my mind, I reviewed everything Kellen had told me over the years, but especially tonight. The truth about humanity, that we were both our greatest threat and our greatest hope. That our emotional intensity made us dangerous, but also potentially magnificent. That our survival depended on millions of individual choices to be better, wiser, more connected. It was a heavy truth, but also a hopeful one, because it meant the future wasn't predetermined. It meant that every person, every choice, every moment of compassion or wisdom or courage actually mattered. We weren't doomed. We were just unfinished, still becoming. As sleep took me, my last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought Kellen into my life. Gratitude for the perspective he'd given me, and gratitude that I'd lived long enough to understand that my species, for all its flaws, was worth hoping for. When I woke the next morning, stiff and cold despite the rising sun, Kellen was gone. But on the table beside my chair was a small object I'd never seen before, a smooth metallic disc about the size of a silver dollar with strange markings etched into its surface. I picked it up and immediately felt a warmth flow through it, and with it a message for remembering, for understanding, for friendship. Kellen. I held that disc for a long time, turning it over in my arthritic hands, feeling the weight of 22 years of friendship, of learning, of connection between two beings who should never have met but did, and I understood finally what I was meant to do with the time I had left. I would write it down, all of it. Every conversation, every insight, every truth Kellen had shared. Not for publication, not for fame, but as a record, proof that it had happened. Proof that humans and another species could be friends. Proof that someone out there believed we were worth saving. So that's what I'm doing now in these final months. Writing everything down, preserving the wisdom Kellen shared with me. Maybe someone will read it someday. Maybe it will matter. Or maybe it won't. But I'll know that I tried to pass forward what I learned, that I didn't let this knowledge die with me. And in those moments when the pain gets bad, when the cancer reminds me that time is running out, I hold that metallic disc and remember what Kellen taught me, that every choice matters, that humans are capable of extraordinary things, and that somewhere out there, among the stars, someone is watching and hoping we'll survive long enough to join them. That hope, more than anything, is what keeps me going. That hope is what I want to leave behind